Welcome to Lesson 8.1. We are simplifying expressions with zero and negative exponents as well as evaluating exponential expressions. If you look at the key concepts here, we have zero as an exponent for every non-zero number. So that means a cannot be zero. We have the property that tells us a to the zero power equals 1. And hopefully in class, I will be able to show you a little proof about that. Remind me. So we have examples. 5 to the 0 power is 1. Negative 2 to the 0 power is 1. 1.02 to the 0 power is 1. And the fraction 1/3 to the 0 power is 1. It's important to notice whatever is directly in front of the 0 power is 1, okay, becomes 1. And if there were a negative sign outside of those parentheses, we have to remember that that negative is not taken to the 0 power, and then it would result in something a little different. Let's look at the next concept here. We have a negative exponent. So again, a has to be a number. It can't be 0. And we have n is an exponent. That has to be an integer as well. A to the negative n equals 1 over a to the n. And we have 6 to the negative 4, and that becomes the fraction 1 over 6 to the 4th. See how the negative sign right here has disappeared. That I like to think of that negative sign in the exponent as a ticket, and you've used your ticket to either go up or down on the fraction depending on where you're starting. So here we have negative 8 to the negative 1, and here's a great the negative 8. Don't worry about that negative sign out here right now. We know though that we have this negative exponent, so we use that ticket to bring it down to the denominator of our fraction, and so we have negative 8 to the first power, which is just negative 8, and so we could even simplify this further. The whole point is we never want to leave any negative exponents as well as anything to the 0 power. You want to simplify it as much as you can. Let's try a few examples here. So our first example, we have 3 to the negative 2. So you're going to remember that negative in the exponent is its ticket. So we're going to use the ticket, and it becomes 1 over 3 squared. And then to take that a step further and simplify, after we've gotten rid of the negative exponent, we simplify, and now we have the fraction 1/9. Moving on to our next example, we have negative 22.4 to the 0 power. And again, notice that parenthesis is there. So we have, that becomes 1. If this were written a little differently, let me find my pen here. If this were written a little differently, if this were written negative, oh, maybe not. Let's try a crayon maybe. Okay. So if this were written come on. Negative 22 to the 0 power like this. Only the 22 will be taken to the 0 power, okay? And then you would have negative 1 there. Remind me to show you another example in class. All right, moving on to our next example. So we want to simplify the next example. So we have here, we have 1 to the 1 over x to the negative 3, excuse me. And so we are going to, remember, we have the negative exponent, and it's already in the denominator. So again, thinking about that negative exponent as its ticket to the numerator. So we're going to use that ticket up, and now we have 1 over x to the negative third becomes negative, or x to the third. Okay, notice negative exponents are different than negative numbers. This is going to be confusing for some of you. You have to really understand what the negative exponent is doing here. All right, go ahead, and there should be a few quick checks. Take a moment, see if you can do those, and then we will I'll give you the answers to those. Welcome back. Hopefully you paused this video and took a moment to try the quick checks. We have in our first quick check, 1a, we have 3 to the negative 4. So my first step in this is going to be to use that ticket to take the 3 to the 4th to the denominator. So now I have 1 over 3 to the 4th, and knowing that 3 squared is 9, multiply that by 3 again, 27, and once more to get 81. Here in B, everything is to the 0 power, so therefore that is going to be 1. In C, we have 2 negatives, okay? Now remember, only the negative exponent, okay, is going to be used up to move to the denominator. So we now have 1 over negative 4 to the third. Okay, notice how the difference here. We've used the negative exponent to move it to the denominator. And now we have 1 over negative 4 to the third. That means negative 4 times negative 4 times negative 4. And if you're multiplying 3 negative numbers together, you're going to get a negative answer. Okay, so 4 times 4 times 4 is 64. So 1 over negative 64. You can also write this, and I would highly recommend that you write this as negative 1 over 64. Remember, keeping your negative numbers in the numerator will help you not lose them. Okay, next example we have is now we're evaluating. So let's look at what we've got here. We've got 4x squared y to the negative 3. And then we've got x equals 3 and y equals negative 2. So we've got some negatives going on here. So the first thing you want to do before you start plugging in x is 3 and y is negative 2, you want to look at your expression and get rid of all of the negative exponents you can. So that's going to be my first step. And I rewrite 4x squared y to the negative 3 as 4x squared over y to the third. So that's my first step. Now I don't have any negative exponents, so now I can go ahead and plug in 3 and negative 2 in for x and y. So I put in 3 for x. And notice how I put it in parentheses here, and only that squared is affecting that 3. It has nothing to do with the 4. The 4 is outside and it's just multiplied. In the denominator, I plug in negative 2 for y, and that is to the third power. So in the numerator, I have 4 times, basically 3 times 3, because 3 squared is 3 times 3, which is 4 times 9. In the denominator, I have negative 2 times negative 2 times negative 2, which will give me negative 8. And then I multiply my numerator. Notice how I've brought this negative sign up to the numerator. Again, you're less likely to forget it if you leave it in the numerator. And then that is over 8. I've now reduced my fraction just to make it simplified, and I have something that's practically prime here of negative 9 over 2. Okay? Let's go ahead. Try the quick check, see how you do on that. I'm going to be giving you the answers here. When you're done, you can check your work, and we'll move on. Here's the quick check, 2a. So notice we have 11m to the negative 5. So my first step is going to be to get rid of that negative exponent. Now the 11 is not to the negative 5, only what is directly in front of that exponent. So in this case, it's just the m. So the m to the 5th comes down. The 11 stays in the numerator because it doesn't have a negative exponent or a ticket. In B here, we have 7s to the negative 4t squared. Okay, the 7 and the t squared do not have negative exponents, so there's no way to move those to a different part of the fraction. S to the negative 4 does, and so we bring that down. Okay, and that is an S, not a 5. Let's look at two more. We have 2 over a to the negative 3. And again, we have this negative third power, okay? So we're going to use that negative up and move the a to the third to the numerator. So now we have 2a to the third. Over here in D, we have n to the negative 5, and we already have a v squared in the denominator. Now, the v squared can't move because it has a positive exponent, but the n to the negative 5 can come down, and if you think about it, visit the v squared here. How are we doing? Please take a moment, and if you're having any trouble, if I've said anything you aren't following, write a question and make sure you have that ready for me. Now we are going to evaluate a few examples here in which n is negative 2 and w is 5. And again, we've got a negative integer here, not a negative exponent. So my first step is to plug or to move the n to the negative 3 to the denominator. W to the 0 becomes 1. So I have 1 over n to the third, and n to the third is actually negative 2 to the third, which becomes negative 8. So I have negative 1/8. In example B here, I have n to the negative 1. So I'm going to move that n to the negative 1 down into the denominator. And so I do have negative 1 over 50 because n is negative 2. And w is 5. So 5 squared is 25 times negative 2 is negative 50. And again, I've brought my negative 1 to the numerator. Last two examples here. We have w to the 0. That becomes 1. And then n to the 4th, which is negative 2 to the 4th, becomes 16. 1 over n w to the negative 2. So this w to the negative 2 actually comes up into the numerator, and that is going to make w squared, which is 5 squared, which is 25. In the denominator, you're left with a negative 2, and I just bring the negative up here to the 25, so I'm less likely to lose it. All right. Please take your time and check these quick checks, and if you have any questions, please write them down or email me.